The alien queen saw my scar. Then she whispered, "It can't be you." The chains bit into my wrists, and the throne room smelled like burnt copper and old power. I did not look at the floor. My father always said that looking at the floor in front of dangerous people is the last thing you should do, because it tells them you have already decided they have won. I had not decided that, not yet. The Vethron court stretched ahead of me in 2 long rows of armored figures, each one standing still as carved stone. Their chitin gleamed in colors that had no name in any human language, somewhere between blue and the feeling you get when you realize you are lost. 6,000 years of civilization staring at one man in a torn flight suit. I counted 37 of them before the guard at my back shoved me forward and I lost count. My name is Owen Farrell. I am 29 years old. I have a degree in xenodiplomacy from a university that most people on Earth have never heard of, and 11 months of field experience, which sounds like a lot until you are standing in front of the most powerful monarch in the known galaxy with your hands bound in something that glows. The queen was at the far end of the room, elevated on a throne made from something dark and dense that did not reflect light the way normal matter does. Later I would learn it was compressed stellar material, the collapsed remnant of a small star, carved over 3 centuries by Vethron craftsmen. She was enormous and still. 6 amber eyes, arranged in 2 columns on a face that was all angles and precision. Her wings were folded flat against her back. When a Vethron folds their wings like that, it means they are deciding something. A drone the size of a grapefruit floated to my left and began speaking in a voice that came out of it like water being poured over gravel. Owen Farrell, human, junior diplomatic officer, Earth Interstellar Corps. Survivor of the vessel designated as Corridor 7, destroyed in Vethron sovereign space 14 days ago. You are charged with unlawful transit through a sealed quarantine corridor, survival of a zone designated for non-contact species, and possession of a registered artifact belonging to an extinct civilization. How do you answer? I answered the only way I could. I answered that my ship was shot down before I had any chance to change course, that I survived because I am apparently very difficult to kill, and that I have no idea what artifact you are talking about. The drone paused. That pause felt significant. Around me, 37 armored figures did not move. The queen, far above and far away, watched me with all 6 eyes. Then she stood up. That, I would learn later, had not happened in 400 years. Vethron queens do not descend from the throne during a prisoner hearing. They simply do not do it. There are rules, and then there are the rules beneath the rules, the ones held up by nothing except the shared understanding that they cannot be broken, and this was one of those. She broke it. She came down the steps slowly, and the sound her legs made on the floor was a dry, deliberate rhythm, like someone counting down. The court was so quiet I could hear my own pulse. She walked the full length of the room and stopped 2 meters in front of me. She was taller than I had understood. Her face was level with the top of my head, and her eyes were moving across me the way a cartographer moves across an unmapped territory, methodical, hungry, trying to put coordinates to something that should not exist. Then her gaze dropped to my forearm. I have a scar there. It starts just below the inside of my elbow and branches down toward my wrist in a shape like a river delta, or like lightning caught in skin. I got it when I was 7 years old. My father had a lathe press in our garage. He used it to repair decorative ironwork for neighbors on weekends. I reached in to pick up a piece he had been working on, and the press shifted, and the metal caught my arm on the way out. My father drove me to the hospital with one hand on the wheel and one hand on my arm, pressing hard, telling me to keep talking so I would not go quiet on him. It is not a mystical scar. It is not a sign. It is the result of a 7-year-old boy who did not listen when told to stay on the other side of the garage. The queen looked at that scar for a long time. Then she said something, very quietly, in a language that the drone did not translate. The language was old. I know now it was an archaic register of Vethron used only in certain sacred records, a language that had not been spoken aloud in this court in longer than most human civilizations have existed. I did not understand the words, but I understood the sound of them. That particular quality a voice gets when it meets something it was not ready for. Something the voice had rehearsed for so long that the real thing felt like a door opening in a wall you thought was solid. She whispered, and the court heard it, and every armored figure in that room went absolutely still. It can't be you. Within the hour, the resin chains were off my wrists. Someone brought me something warm in a ceramic container. I did not drink it, but I held it, because my hands were cold and I needed something solid to hold. A small, thin Vethron with faded wing markings was introduced to me as the court historian. His name required a click in the middle that I could not produce, so I called him nothing and he did not seem to care. He sat across from me at a table and folded his hands and explained things with the measured patience of someone who had spent a very long life explaining things to people who did not want to hear them. The Vethron had a prophecy. They called it the Scar of the Branching Rivers. It described a being who would arrive from the edge of known space during a period of internal fracture, a civil conflict that had been building in Vethron politics for decades, two ruling factions pulling the empire toward a war that no one wanted but no one knew how to stop. The being would carry the scar on their arm. They would be a stranger to the Vethron. They would be, in the original language, twice born, which the historian explained meant born into one world and then thrown into another. Humanity had been alone in the galaxy for the first 14 million years of its existence. Then we built a faster-than-light engine 11 years ago, and we were not alone anymore. If that was not being twice born, I did not know what was. The being in the prophecy was called the Kelharan, the twice-born stranger. They would end the fracture war by choosing which side would win. I said that sounded like an enormous responsibility for a junior diplomatic officer. The historian did not smile. He said that the prophecy was silent on the matter of rank. I asked what happened to the Kelharan after they made their choice. The historian looked at the table. Then he said the original text used a word that translated, loosely, as consumed by the consequence. He said the translators had been refining that phrasing for some time. He said I should not worry about it. That is the thing about people who tell you not to worry about something. They always say it with the expression of a person who is worrying very much about it themselves. That night, in a room that was technically a guest chamber and practically a very comfortable cell, I sat on a surface that was meant to be a bed, and thought about what I knew. A Vethron civil war was close. Lord Cast Velthan, the leader of the opposing faction, had enough support among the military houses to make a move for power within months. The Queen had held the empire together for 60 years, through intelligence and patience, and what I suspected was a deeply exhausting performance of certainty she did not always feel. And now a human with a garage accident on his arm had landed in the middle of it. An envoy from Velthan's faction arrived before dawn. He was polished and quiet, and he offered me things in a voice like someone laying out flatware: a human embassy, protected trade routes, a seat at every major council for the next 50 years. He said that Lord Cast Velthan was a reasonable being who understood that the human species was young and needed guidance, and that there was no more powerful guide in the galaxy than the one who controlled the Vethron military houses. He slid a data crystal across the table. He said everything I needed to understand about Velthan's vision for the Empire, and for humanity's place inside it, was contained in that crystal. He said the Queen was old and frightened and holding on to power with hands that had been slipping for 20 years. He said that backing the wrong side of history had consequences that lasted longer than a single lifetime. He said all of that in a tone of voice that was pleasant and warm, and had a blade hidden in every sentence. I looked at the crystal on the table between us. I did not pick it up. I said I would think about it. He said there was not much time for thinking. I said that was a shame, because thinking was essentially all I had going for me. After he left, I sat with the crystal on the table and did not sleep. I thought about my father instead. He was an ironworker by trade, and a careful man by nature. He measured twice, cut once, and never trusted anything that came to him already finished. He used to say that the most dangerous gift anyone could give you was a decision that had already been made for you, that all you had to do was sign your name to it. I left the crystal on the table. The Queen came herself the following morning. She came without the court, without the ceremony, without the translator drone. Just her and me, and a slant of pale light from a window that looked out over a city I had no name for. She was smaller without the throne and the elevated platform, which is not a small thing to say about a being who stood 2 meters tall, but the way she held herself was different. The angles were still there, but the performance was gone. She told me the truth. She said the prophecy was not ancient. It was not cosmic. It had been written 200 years ago by a political philosopher named something I could not pronounce, who had been hired by a ruling faction to create a theological framework that would justify whoever found the Kelharan first consolidating absolute power. The scar, the branching river pattern, the timing, all of it had been designed to be vague enough to fit eventually, and specific enough to be undeniable when it did. She said she had known this for 30 years. She said the prophecy had nonetheless become real. Because when millions of people believe something hard enough, the truth of its origin stops mattering. The factions had staked everything on this moment. Velthan's people believed the Kelharan would choose them, because they had more to offer. Her people believed it would choose her because she had found me first. And somewhere in the history books, a dead political philosopher had a very good laugh. I asked her why she was telling me this. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said that she was tired of being the only person in the room who knew the whole truth, and that she had made enough decisions alone, and that if she was going to be destroyed by the outcome of this, she wanted at least one other person to understand exactly what was being destroyed and why. I respected that more than I could say. The Grand Assembly was the next morning. 17 star systems would be watching on broadcast. The two factions would stand on opposite sides of the hall. I would stand at the center podium and declare a name, and history would turn on that declaration. And the consumption clause, the part about what happened to me after, had been quietly removed from every official document I had been given. I stood at the podium and looked out at the assembled court. Velthan's faction on my left, all certainty and sharp edges. The Queen's people on my right, arranged behind a monarch who was holding herself very still in the way that people hold themselves still when they are frightened and will not show it. 17 star systems were waiting. I did not say a name. I said, "My name is Owen Farrell. I am 29 years old. The scar on my arm came from a lathe press in my father's garage on a planet most of you have never heard of, and I was 7 years old and I did not listen when told to stay away from it. That is the entire origin story of your prophecy. That is the whole of the cosmic sign you have been waiting for. A child who did not listen, and a machine that did not forgive the mistake." I said, "I sat in your court and I watched two groups of very powerful people use a dead man's words to dress up a war in the clothing of destiny. I watched them offer me things and threaten me with other things, and the whole time, beneath all of it, what they were really doing was asking me to give them permission to do what they were already planning to do, wrapped in holy language so that no one had to be responsible for it afterward." I said, "I come from a species that has been ruled by prophecy and tradition, and the authority of people who speak in certain voices about certain things for as long as we have existed. We learned, slowly and painfully, that prophecy is just a story powerful people tell, so they do not have to be questioned. And the most dangerous thing you can put in a room is someone who refuses to be useful to the story you have written for them." I said, "I am not your Kel Haran. I am a junior diplomatic officer from a planet that has had faster-than-light travel for 11 years. I have no authority to choose the future of your civilization, and I will not pretend otherwise to make this easier for either of you." Then I stepped back from the podium. The silence lasted long enough that I started counting my own heartbeats. I got to 11 before the first sound came. From Velthan's side, a low sound, not quite argument, more like the noise a structure makes when something load-bearing shifts. Because half of his faction had followed the prophecy, not him. They had believed. And I had just stood in front of 17 star systems and explained, clearly and without cruelty, that there was nothing to follow. The Queen's position did not collapse. It grew quieter and steadier, the way a fire grows steadier when the wind stops. She had told me the truth and I had not used it against her. In a court that ran on versions of events, she now had the version that had been spoken aloud in front of everyone, and it was the honest one, and it pointed at her. Velthan did not go to war. Not because I had defeated him, I had not. Not because the prophecy had been disproven, belief does not die that cleanly, but because I had stripped the prophecy of its political function before it could be used, and without that function, the war had no costume to wear, and men like Velthan do not fight wars in plain clothes. The Queen found me in the corridor outside the hall, still in that stripped-down version of herself without the ceremony around her. She asked if I had been afraid. I told her yes, not of the court, not of the execution that had been quietly on the table at the start. I was afraid that I would stand up there and play the part they had written for me without stopping to question whether I had chosen it, that I would be useful to someone else's story because it was easier than making my own. She looked at me for a long time with all 6 of those amber eyes. She said that was, apparently, the most Kel Haran thing I could have said. We both knew what she meant by that. We both did not say it out loud. I left with a provisional non-aggression treaty, observer status in the Vethron Assembly, and a formal request, submitted through official channels, for more human diplomatic personnel. The specific phrasing in the request described humans as possessing a notable resistance to ceremonial pressure and an unusual comfort with inconvenient truths. There was a debrief when I got back. It lasted 4 hours and involved 6 people from 3 different departments, 2 of whom had never left Earth, and kept asking me to repeat things that they clearly did not believe the first time. A woman named Claire from Political Analysis asked me whether I had received any training in Vethron religious protocols before the mission. I told her that I had received a 40-minute overview module and a pamphlet. She wrote something down. A man named George from Strategic Relations asked me whether I believed the Queen had manipulated me into acting on her behalf. I told him that I believed she had told me the truth and trusted me to make my own decision with it. which in my experience is as far from manipulation as it is possible to get. He also wrote something down. Neither of them looked satisfied. My supervisor at the Corps read my report and asked me, 3 separate times, in 3 separate ways, how I had walked into an alien civil war as a prisoner and walked out with a treaty. I told him the truth each time. I just did not do what they expected me to do. He said that was not a repeatable strategy. I told him it was, in my experience, the only strategy we had. On the shuttle home, I sat by the small port window and looked at the stars. After a while, I looked at the scar. Same shape it has always been. The branching line, the river delta spread of it, the raised edge along the bottom where the metal caught deepest. My father called it my map the first time he saw it properly healed. He said it looked like I had the whole Mississippi worked into my arm, and I might as well know where I was going. I was 7, and I thought that was the funniest thing anyone had ever said. 6,000 years of history. 17 star systems holding their breath. A queen who broke 4 centuries of protocol to walk the length of her throne room. And all of it spinning on a moment in a garage on a Sunday afternoon when a kid reached in somewhere he should not have. Humanity makes meaning out of things that have no meaning. We cannot seem to help it. Give us a cloud and we will find a face in it. Give us a scar and we will find a map. Give us a collection of random stars and we will draw lines between them, and name the shapes after animals and heroes and instruments we love. We just get very uncomfortable when someone else tries to make meaning out of us, when someone else decides what our shape is, what our story means, what we are supposed to do next. That is not wisdom. I do not think it counts as a virtue. It is just what we are. A species that spent so long being handed scripts that we developed a very specific and very stubborn allergy to performing them. I looked at the scar for a long time. Then I put my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. And for the first time in 3 weeks, I slept without dreaming about chains.